we'll go ahead and start now. So hello, everybody. I'm Wendy Perrin with WendyPerrin.com. We're a travel advice and trip planning website. And travelers come in and ask us where they should go and how, what's the smartest way to plan it. And we recommend to them the best destination and the best local fixer for their needs. And what we have seen is that so many people are asking for the same places at the same time of year, which is why we're like, wait a second, we have got to share with you all advice for where to go and how to plan it this year. So anyway, let me just start by introducing my colleagues here. Brook Wilkinson, who is our executive editor. Many of you know Brook already.
Yes, hi everyone.
Brook answers many of your questions. And we also have Carolyn Spencer-Brown, who is our newest colleague. We're so excited to have her. Carolyn and I worked together when I was at TripAdvisor, and she was the editor-in-chief of Cruise Critic. And we also run into each other when traveling in the oddest places.
Places.
The last place was Tahiti.
Yeah. Yep.
So anyway,
it's lovely to be here. Thank you, Wendy, for having me here, and can't wait to hear what everybody has to say. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Yep.
And I apologize in advance if anyone sees me yawning, but I literally just got home from Europe, and it's a little late for me, so I'll try to stay awake. I'm sure I'll be fine.
Yeah. Thank you, Carolyn. And yes, and we'll hear all about where she just was in Europe. But first of all, I also want to say a thank you to our sponsor, MedJet. MedJet is a global medical transport and emergency assistance membership that protects you from certain, various emergencies, such as if you're stuck in a hospital and you want to get home to the doctor you trust. And they've been very innovative before the pandemic, introducing MedJet Horizon, but also during the pandemic when they were the first to transport for COVID. And I've had a MedJet membership since my kids were babies. So it's just another, something for your travel toolkit. And you can learn more about it on the website, WendyPerrin.com. So let's get started with where and when to travel in 2023.
Sorry, Wendy, I just wanted to jump in and forgot to mention before. I see many of you have already written into the Q&A box, and that's where if you have any questions for any of us over the course of the next hour, please just drop them in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Thanks.
And the rest we'll certainly try to answer in articles and in the newsletter for you, because we got some really smart questions so far. We've been very impressed with the quality of the questions we've got. So the real reason we wanted to have this talk with you guys is that it's highly likely that it's going to be an extremely busy year for international travel, much busier than last year. And last year was busy enough. I mean, at least in certain parts of the world, definitely Western Europe. So the reason is that many more countries have dropped their COVID-related entry requirements. So that means not only do travelers not need to test negative to get in, a lot of travelers were not traveling internationally last year because they wanted to be able to get back into their home country. They wanted to be able to return home on time. Now that there isn't that worry anymore, there are really only a few countries that still have any kind of COVID-related entry requirement. So now is the time when everyone is making international trips abroad, and it's not just people in the US. It's not like just everybody in the US suddenly wants to go to Italy's Amalfi Coast. It's jet setters all over the world from every country except maybe China and Russia, right? I mean, everyone is trying to go to the same iconic places around the world. So that's why we want to give you, tell you what's going to be busy and where, what some alternate ideas might be. I mentioned how a lot of people ask for Italy's Amalfi Coast. I mean, the number of people who want to go to Greece in June, the number of people who want to go to New Zealand right now, everyone's wants to go to New Zealand now. I was just there, actually. I was lucky enough to get in over the Christmas, New Year's holiday, but that's because I booked my airline ticket way back in March of last year. So so here are some sort of rules to go by, guidelines for looking at what's going to be really busy, because when a place is getting a ton of tourist crowds, that also means high prices. It means sold out hotels. It means you can't get into the places you want to get into, and it creates all sorts of logistical challenges as well. So just know that the most popular countries last year, many of them were in Western Europe, and they're again the most popular countries this year. We're talking about Italy, the United Kingdom, France, Portugal and Spain, Greece. These are some of the most popular places that they wanted to go to last year, and they want to go to this year as well. So our first piece of advice is, if you're thinking about Europe, especially during peak season over the summer, think about, instead of Southern Europe, think Northern Europe. If you need, Southern Europe is fabulous, but go at an off-peak time, go in shoulder season, go in like March or November. Think about more northerly places, which are not going to be as busy, like, for instance, Austria, Switzerland, Germany, Scandinavia. Last summer, we were looking for someplace a little offbeat. We went to Romania. My family had like the best vacation ever in Romania. Gorgeous, beautiful mountains, away from all the crowds. It was really blissful and very safe. So we're going to give you more under the radar ideas like that. We also want to explain, there's a pattern we've seen during the whole pandemic, which is that when the places that just reopened, like the places that are latest to reopen, are the places that have been closed alongside, are the places everybody wants to go to. So right now, the places that reopened most recently that everybody wants to go to, besides Europe, but they reopened only sort of later in 2022, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Those are the places that right now are just full. I mean, like, good luck trying to get into New Zealand before March. As I mentioned, I was just there over Christmas, New Year's, and it was fabulous, but like there were a lot of people. So those are, that's another thing to think about is if you do want to go to Australia, New Zealand, or Japan, go in shoulder season, go in lower, like think about going in, April or October or sometime when it is not, the peak of winter, our time, which is summer in Australia and New Zealand. Japan is always so popular. It's cherry blossom season in the spring was sold out a long time ago. Another thing I just want to mention is please look into taking nonstop flights. What we saw last year, and it's going to happen again this year, is that there were so many flight cancellations. There were so many issues when people had connections and they missed a flight or their luggage got lost. More and more airlines have been introducing nonstop flights from US gateways to really interesting locales. I mean, just as one example, like United, they introduced flights to Dubrovnik, from Newark to Dubrovnik, to Mallorca, nonstops to Mallorca, the island off of Spain, to the Azores, islands off of Portugal. So there are some really cool, and the reason we were able to go to New Zealand was that Air New Zealand introduced a nonstop from JFK to Auckland. So nonstops can really make life a lot easier. And so that's another suggestion. If you need to connect in airports that are smarter, that it's like the smartest places to make connections in. We've got lists of these on the website. And so in our newsletter, we will share these articles again about like lists of all the great new nonstop flights, lists of all the smartest airports to make connections in. And one other thing about flying internationally, if you need to make a connection in the United States, if you've got a domestic flight to an international connection, like let's say you're flying via JFK to get to Africa for your safari, consider spending the night at that connection point, because if you miss that flight to Africa, it can seriously disrupt your entire 2-week safari, all those plans, right? So just think about if you've got a domestic connection leading to an international flight, just spending the night before getting on your plane, just to make sure you don't have the chaos that can happen when there are mass cancellations. Those are the main points I wanted to make about the sort of problems. And now I would love to turn it over to Brooke to hear about the solutions of where we think you should be going in 2023.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. So there are two regions in particular that I have my eye on this year. The first is Southeast Asia. It was among the last regions to reopen after COVID, and it hasn't bounced back as quickly as Europe. So there's still time to see it before the crowds have returned. We've gotten fabulous reviews from travelers just back from Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Indonesia, reviews that you can read on our website. And I think there are also great opportunities in other parts of Asia, including India and Central Asia. I'm not saying this for Asia overall. There are two big exceptions. One is Japan, which, as Wendy just mentioned, had a huge surge in demand and therefore prices after it reopened fully last fall. And China, some of you may have seen in the news that China has reopened. It is not yet issuing tourist visas to US travelers. So it is not really open to travel at this point. That's probably going to happen later in 2023. But I do think lots of parts of Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, are a great opportunity. And I'm taking that to heart. I'm in the midst of planning a trip myself to Southeast Asia for this spring before those big tour groups return. The second region that I think is a smart choice, it's a perennially overlooked destination, but especially so in 2023, I think, it's South America. It's hard to beat South America. I just love it. It's got great sun and winter, great value for money. You get less jet lag, fewer tour groups there, and it's just an outstanding diversity of landscapes and experiences in one continent. And here's why it's particularly smart in 2023. There aren't many countries, as Wendy mentioned, that still have COVID-related entry requirements in place, but several of them happen to be in South America. Those are Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, and Uruguay. So that'll probably, I think, keep visitor numbers relatively low this year. The thing is, our WOW listers, the travel specialists on the WOW list, they've been navigating those entry requiremements for years now, and they really know how to handle them easily. So with their help, you can have a hassle-free trip and have all the right documentation in place before your travels, while other people are sitting at home thinking it's too complicated to get there. Our travelers have had incredible experiences recently. Celebrity magnet beach towns in Brazil, coffee region haciendas in Colombia, Amazonian lodges in Ecuador, hella hiking in Chile, and scenic wine regions in Argentina. So that's a place I would have my eye on too for this year. Now, if you're thinking that's all sounds great, but I'm just dying to get to the Mediterranean in 2023. If you simply must travel to a place that's really in high demand, choose under the radar locations within it. So take Italy, for example. When everyone else is going to the Amalfi Coast and Lake Como, consider other options like the Friuli region in the Northeast or Calabria in the South. The folks on the WOW list know local spots like those that will give you relief from the crowds, and they often have insider connections that can get you into the sites after hours or get you behind the scenes access to places that aren't open to the general public. So you might be able to have a quieter experience of those busier places. In terms of when to travel, I think shoulder season is smarter than ever. That's kind of the travel industry term for the weeks just before or after peak season, when the crowds aren't there and prices are a bit lower. It used to be that peak season meant, reliably great weather, but with climate change, that's unfortunately far from a certainty these days. So it's no longer realistic to count on perfect conditions in peak season. But the flip side is that it also means you might get perfect conditions in a shoulder season month. And in Europe, since COVID, we've seen that months that were once considered low season, like March or November in Italy, are now actually part of shoulder season. So they're smart times to travel, and people are starting to pick up on that. And now I want to pass it on to Carolyn, I think, who has compelling reasons to extend your travel calendar even further than shoulder season.
So one of the things I wanted to add to the Southern Europe versus Northern Europe debate for this year is that if you remember last year, there were some really brutal heat waves in Southern Europe and in the Mediterranean during June, July, and August. And if that's not a compelling reason to try to book later in the year or earlier in the year, I think there is no compelling reason. I mean, it gets really hot, and that's why Northern Europe, I mean, you might get a heat wave, but it'll be nothing like what you're getting in the South. So I just wanted to add that point. So I love to talk about going to places in funky times of the year when it's really not tourist season at all. And I just got back from 2 weeks in Helsinki in Finland in January, and it was icy and it was cold, and people bundle up and just get on with it. And I love the way that the city doesn't shut down. And in some cases in Europe, cities do shut down a bit in the summer months because of vacations, but everything is revving up. I mean, even the carousel was going full time every day, even in the snow, which I'm not sure how much you could see from it, but it's a really great time to go and be part of the local culture. And you might spend more time indoors than you would in the summertime, which to my mind is make sure you pick a cozy hotel with, and maybe you upgrade your room a little bit more than you might have, probably because it's not as expensive anyway. But I found that with this trip to Helsinki, I went to museums more often. I went to the fabulous library that has been built in the last 5 years. And it was just a really kind of a cozier, more long lunches that you might not want to do in the summertime when you want to get out and get on the ferries and get out in the water. But everything was open and vibrant, and you do get to see people going about their business in a way that is not it's more authentic than in travel tourism season. So does that make sense, guys?
Absolutely.
And the other thing I will say is that is a little nice bit of a perk, but I kept getting upgrades that I wouldn't get in the summertime. So I got upgraded every step at almost every hotel that I stayed in. I got upgraded simply because they had extra rooms. They weren't full. And yet conversely, so I did what Wendy was suggesting about the flights. I did a flight from Helsinki to Zurich. I overnighted there and then flew to Philadelphia the next day. And I stayed at the airport, a very nice hotel called the Hyatt Regency at the Circle. And it turned out that the 2 days I was there, the president of Philippines and his whole entourage were also there. And it was jam-packed and a little bit like summer. But I couldn't have predicted that. I mean, things do go on. Business travel happens, conventions happen. They're happening more and more as we're getting back from the pandemic. But I have to say, what a delight to walk around Zurich on a cold day, but it was sunny, and to go into one of these traditional restaurants and have a traditional meal and just take your time and talk and catch up and watch everybody doing what they're doing. And it was just so much fun. And I think it's a really fun time to go to. And conversely, last summer, when everybody goes to Zermatt in Switzerland for skiing, I went last summer and I just hiked, and it was beautiful and lovely and laid back and calm. And so I really encourage you to think about that.
And Carolyn, you were mentioning the other day that there are cruises now that are actually taking advantage of low season. They're cruising year round in Europe, even in low season.
Not many of them, but some of them are. And Viking cruises, ocean cruises, is one, in fact, that I did do in December. I did a Mediterranean cruise from, I forget where we got on. We got off from Barcelona to Rome. And the coolest thing about the December trip was the weather was actually quite warm. It was like 60s and early 70s. And I mean, is that not the most beautiful weather you can get all year round? But also we kind of timed it so we hit Christmas markets. And so I remember going to the one in Monte Carlo, which was really lovely and quirky, and the one in Corsica as well, where Santa was putting little kids on his knee. And it was a really special, authentic experience that was not, these markets aren't done for tourists the way the river markets are. They were really done for locals, and you just felt like you were part of the community. And that's one of the most special things about traveling at this time. There are things you have to sacrifice, but you get so much back.
Cool. Well, everybody, Carolyn will be speaking a lot more about cruises and other ways of exploring the world's waterways on Thursday, just so you know.
And we try very hard not to use the word cruise, but to use the term exploring by water. So we're not going to talk so much about the big ships, but more about all the really authentic, funky, different, luxurious, cozy kinds of experiences you have to get on the water and see places in a way it's very distinctive.
Cool. So Brooke, is there anything else that you want, any other points you want to make before we turn to some of these questions?
We've already got questions coming in, so I think we'll just get started with those, and many other points will come up from that. The first one, what about Eastern Europe in late June, early July? Wendy, you were in Eastern Europe, I think, was that August of last year that you went to Romania?
We were in Romania in late July, early August, which was it was a great time to be there. I mean, it was beautiful. So yes, I think there are a lot of places in Eastern Europe that would be lovely in late June. Of course, the farther north you go, also the more hours of daylight you have. In parts of Northern Europe in late June, it's going to be light out until 9:30, 10 p.m. And so, the more hours of daylight you have, the more sightseeing you can do in fewer days, which a lot of people, that appeals to a lot of people. So yes, I think Eastern Europe is a great idea because it is not Western Europe.
It's more exotic. I mean,
A lot more
people been there. Yeah.
Room to roam.
There's
And
more to discover.
on the topic of Europe in the summer months, another listener asked, many Europeans vacation in August. Does that make it a less desirable month to travel in Europe?
So if you want, it's kind of the point that Carolyn was making, that if you want to see the local people doing their thing and be part of that local culture, you want to go at a time when they're there and you're one of the only travelers, which tends to be more in low season. I have to say, though, I've had some wonderful trips to Europe in August. One of my family's best trips was to London in August because it's not that hot. And the fact that there aren't too many local, I mean, it's actually not as crowded as you might think it would be. But what do you guys think in terms of August in Europe?
So I have a tip that might be helpful to you guys. Is to check out what the country's back to school schedule is, because in many cases in Europe, the kids go back in like mid-August, and when kids are going back to school, parents have to be home, and so nobody's taking the entire month of August. So, for example, if you're going to Finland, and I'll bring that up again just because I was just there. The big time to vacation is June, because that's the midsummer, and everybody takes off and goes to their summer cabin at the lake. But by August, people are getting back into school, back into work, back into the mode, and it becomes much more normal. So it depends on the country.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I tend to think of cities for August trips in Europe, if you want, because the less traffic, fewer crowds, because there aren't as many locals there. There may be fewer restaurants open too, right? It's always the give and take.
Yeah.
And also, if it's really, really hot, then you can you spend a lot of time in indoor air-conditioned places, museums, theaters, that kind of thing in August sometimes. I know that's how a lot of us survive August in New York City, is by spending a lot of time indoors doing cultural things. So I think August has its pros and cons, but generally speaking, you're in a lot of places you won't find as many locals as you might want. I think an important thing also for if it's a cultural trip, you want to be there during the sort of cultural season. Like in Italy, you want to be there when the opera is in season and when the shows are in the music, and often that's just kind of doesn't happen in Europe in August,
We got a question about Peru. What do you think will happen in Machu Picchu? We have a trip planned May 1st to 10th and understand it's closed right now. I've been in touch with one of the Peru specialists on the WOW list. Actually, just today I was emailing with her, and yes, the area in the south around Machu Picchu, Lake Titicaca, is really not a place where tourists are going right now. Cusco's airport is open, but Arequipa is closed. There's still a bit of unrest in that part of the country. Lima and other parts of the country are perfectly safe to visit right now, under the right conditions or the right guidance. Really hard to say. I wish I could tell you what was going to happen in May. I hope you bought travel insurance. That's something we're going to be talking about on Wednesday in our travel talk about protecting your trip and your health. There are policies that can make you whole if you end up having to cancel your trip, but it's really kind of a wait and see, and we're watching, and that's the kind of thing that the folks on the WOW list are really carefully watching the situation on the ground to make sure that their travelers are well cared for. Let's see, what other questions? Wendy, you talked about spending an overnight when traveling internationally. One listener asked, are you seeing airlines allowing overnight extensions when there is a domestic connection before the international leg? Is that something you can speak to, or is that something you'll be talking about?
Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that tomorrow when Brett Snyder, from Cranky Concierge, Brett, the cranky flyer himself, is going to join us and talk about how to do these things as effectively and inexpensively as possible. But I actually, for the way I see it, is I would just, it's usually with those sorts of, it's so easy to buy two separate tickets. I mean, it's often actually less expensive. Like, let's take again that example of the flying from JFK or Newark or New York City to Cape Town or somewhere in Africa. You could just buy those, that's one leg, and then you buy a separate ticket from wherever you are in the United States to that gateway point. Like, often that's actually less expensive than trying to buy a ticket from your hometown to Cape Town. Like that, often if you just piece it together separately, it's going to be less expensive. So I've never seen that as a obstacle. There are countries and routings around the world where airlines, I mean, like, let's say, for instance, you're trying to get to Africa via Dubai. You can fly Emirates via Dubai to Africa or to the Maldives or many other places. Emirates will have a special thing where, you can do a stopover of 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights in Dubai. There are airlines and places like that around the world where they offer that as a matter of course. So it really, but we're going to hear a lot more about it tomorrow from the expert, Brett.
We're getting a lot of questions about, is X destination good in Y month, or where should I go at this time of year? I just want to let everyone know we have a lot of resources on our website that answer those questions. If you have a particular destination in mind and you're wondering when is the right time to go, our insiders guides will answer that. Every one of them has a section on the best times to go and the worst times to go. So look on the WOW list for the insider's guide to the destination you have in mind, and we've got intel there about when you'll want to visit. Conversely, if you have a month of the year when you have a window when you're able to travel, and you're wondering what destinations are ideal at that time of year, we have a series of articles, when to go where. You can find it through on the nav bar. We'll also be sending out links in our newsletter, but it's on the website. Every month of the year, we have a different article that lists a dozen or more different destinations around the world that are in that sweet spot of not too crowded, good value for price, and a great experience at that time of year. So a lot of those questions can answer there. Let's see what else. Someone asked about, is it too soon to plan Africa for 2024?
You would be best equipped to answer that, I think, Brooke.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get Go ahead.
I think of a lot of safari specialists who would say, not at all. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
A lot of 2023 is like very full when it comes to safaris, but you would know better than I would.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be on safari twice during COVID at times when, I mean, I still remember having Victoria Falls literally all to myself, which I'd been there once before when it was jam-packed with travelers. So it was one of those things that I'll always remember as part of my COVID experience. And that's not what it's like these days. I mean, people are back on safari, and a lot of these camps and lodges are quite small. So they book up quite far in advance. There just aren't that many rooms to go around, especially if you have certain places that you want to go to. One thing that we see in Africa a lot is that it's many times it's a larger group of family or friends, like a multi-generational, grandparents want to take their kids and then their grandkids on safari. So you might need 2 or 3 or 4 rooms to fit everyone in the group. And that's really challenging to find that kind of space. If a camp only has 6 or 7 rooms total, you're taking over half or more of it. So those kinds of trips, and a larger group in general, the farther out you plan, the better the chances are that you'll find the hotel availability that you need, and that you can plan the trip you want and find the accommodations that fit it, rather than having to kind of piece together where you can find availability and then make it the best of whatever that trip is. So yeah, if I were thinking about a safari in 2024, I'd definitely start that planning, start talking about it now.
I see a question here I'm dying to answer. Other places you recommend for January other than Finland?
Sorry, guys.
There are a lot of places that would surprise you how fun they can be in January. I myself have been in Istanbul, Turkey in January a couple of times. And in fact, we have some travelers who just came back from Istanbul, and it's actually a great time to be there. And boy, can you get bargains in the bazaar, because nobody else is in there buying anything. So the merchants are hungry. We just got a review from some people who just got back from Sicily. They were just in Sicily in January and they had an amazing time. Who knew? An island off of Italy. Rome has some of the smartest people I know have always had this secret place. They don't want anybody to know about how great January is and how great Rome is in January. It's sunny. It's like in the 50s. There aren't that many people. You can get into everything you want to get into. So there are a lot of, and just generally speaking, a lot of European cities are great in January. Paris is great in the winter months. There's so much going on. So and there's so much to do in cities when it gets dark out. If it gets dark out at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there's still so much to do in cities at night. Restaurants, shows, museums, all the rest of it. Who else has ideas for January?
As you go further north in January, the cities are really big about lights and illumination. And so everything is lit up and it's beautiful. And yeah, it got dark at 3:30 where I was, but it's so bright and cheerful that it's a lot of fun. And the other thing I would add on to that, Wendy, and I'm building on what you're saying about cities being a great place to go in the wintertime. I would say you might want to really avoid any kind of seasonal destinations. I think maybe Santorini or some of the great, like Paros in the Greek islands or Patmos, that may pretty much shut down during the winter months. So you do need to be careful. And even I read just recently that Lake Como, for example, is now operating. There are a number of hotels operating in January, which is a very new thing for that destination. So you just want to make sure that it's not just a hotel that you can get into, but that you have restaurants and museums and that kind of thing to enjoy.
Yeah, I think it's worth making the point that I feel like the pandemic shifted the normal tourist seasons in Europe.
Yeah.
What used to be shoulder season is now high season, because everybody said, oh my God, I'm not going to go in June or July. Instead, they thought they were being very clever. I'm going to go in May and I'm going to go in September. But that's like peak season nowadays. And And then times that used to be low season, like November or March, are now shoulder seasons. So many people love to go to Italy, either in November, around Thanksgiving time, or in March. March is also a great time for London. So there a lot of what used to be low season is it's gained a lot of appeal. It's when a lot of people are traveling because more is open, more is happening. Because during the pandemic, these destinations kind of had to spread out. They couldn't take too many people at a time. So they kind of spread everything out and made it easier to enjoy things in low season. So I just think it's one of the great, a good side effect of the pandemic.
And Wendy, we also had a question about Christmas and New Year's. I think a lot of your recommendations for January, the cities, and as Carolyn said, all the illumination, a lot of that holds true for Christmas and New Year's as well, in terms of places to travel at that time of year. Anything else that you would add to that?
Well, just the Christmas markets are an amazing, all those holiday markets in December in Central Europe are an amazing experience. Of course, that's a long time from now, but if anybody hasn't done that, they should, because it's a completely different kind of festive experience than you get here in the United States. Right, Carolyn? Carolyn and I have explored Christmas markets in Germany and Austria together. So
and the best one we found was in, I believe it was in Regensburg in Germany at the Palace of Taxi Turn und Taxi.
Turn and Taxis.
Yes, Taxis.
Yes,
it was like a craftsman market, and everything was handmade, and it was beautiful, beautiful work.
Yeah, it's like you have all these crafts people. It's Christmas markets. It's a very homespun, charming, authentic experience. It's completely different than the kind of crass commercialization of the holidays that you find at your local shopping mall here. It's just a completely different thing.
And what's interesting too is that many destinations, and Regensburg is not a huge town like say Vienna, but they'll have a dozen different markets, and they'll all have different personalities. There'll be one big one, which is where everybody gathers to party and drink glue wine, which is required, almost required. But the markets I found most intriguing, and I found them in Munich as well, were the ones that were very much smaller, cozier, and really part of the community that we were in. And I thought they were so much fun. I've been to markets up the Rhine, up the Danube, all over, and it's just phenomenal. And by the way, the best market ever anywhere is in Strasbourg, France, which is on the Rhine. It's just magical. The town is magical. The artisans are magical. Everything's great.
But that's something to think about, folks, for December or for late. I don't know what the dates are for Strasbourg's market specifically, but a lot of the Christmas markets in Europe do tend to open around Thanksgiving weekend. So it's a great, if you want to take the kids and you can take that Thanksgiving week off, it's a great time for families to experience the markets in Europe.
And I'm actually working on an article that we'll be publishing soon about Christmas trips that our travelers have taken this year. And we've got some fun anecdotes from all over the world. People have been to Vienna for the kind of experience we've been talking about, but also to Australia, Ecuador, Portugal, Patagonia, Morocco, Thailand. So they're really fun places all over the globe to explore at that time of year. Let's see, we have a question about New Zealand. Maybe Wendy, you have a few tidbits of advice. I'm planning a trip to New Zealand at the end of April to visit my daughter during her study abroad semester. We can't afford an official WOW List experience, so what are the best open resources to use to plan a 10-day stay? We will be in Auckland during the week while she's in class. We'd love to do excursions on the bookended weekends to find great places to visit.
Okay, first of all, you are so lucky that your daughter got to do her study abroad in New Zealand. A lot of kids who wanted to do study abroad in New Zealand or wanted to do gap years or gap semesters in New Zealand were shut out for like 3 years during the pandemic. So that's great. And New Zealand is an awesome country. The resources to use. So first of all, I'll just tell you that, I mean, all over Auckland, it was so easy to get Uber. it's very, we just like took Uber a lot of places. I think if you, I mean, there weren't any, but I used a WOW list travel specialist to arrange my trip. Honestly, I'm very glad I did, because there is no way I could have gotten into a lot of these hotels and restaurants if I hadn't. I mean, New Zealand is really, really busy right now. Hopefully at the end of April, it will not be as busy. But I would think that, once you've got your accommodation set, you can also try to maybe talk to or email the concierges at those hotels or people at those hotels to get other tips. I hope that helps.
Another listener has to be in Hong Kong for business around early March. Any suggestions of some place to explore nearby to tack on one additional week to my work trip? Lots of options in that part of the world. It probably depends on the flight schedules. I know flights are kind of slower to come back to Asia than, say, Europe. So probably the first place I would start is what connections are easiest from Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one issue with Asia right now, is that there are not as many nonstops or flights as there were pre-pandemic. On the other hand, they're going to be coming back fast now, especially when you think of all of the flights that are going to be starting up again between China and the US, and like they're going to be like empty, there's going to be a lot of activity in terms of flights, flight availability in Asia. And so, but I think that's really great advice, Brooke, is like, it's going to depend on where you can get to with the airlines. So that's the first stop to try to figure out where to go. But there are so many options. It just depends on where you can fly to easily nonstop from Hong Kong.
Yeah. And it looks like this traveler will also be in London for business in May. Would Donostia, which is San Sebastian, be good to visit that time of year? Wendy, have you been to northern Spain in May?
I've been to northern Spain at times when it was colder than May. I mean, like, I think May would be actually pretty nice for northern Spain. It wouldn't be too hot yet, because I've also been in northern Spain in the middle of summer, and it can be very, very, very hot. So my favorite time I was there was in February once. So I would not dismiss it. I think it's a pretty good, I mean, May sounds nice for northern Spain to me.
I was in Madrid a couple of years ago in May, and it couldn't have been more perfect temperature wise. It was beautiful. I know that's not northern Spain necessarily, but it was great. And also in London, so I was there in May one year. I've been there in May many times, and generally it's the most beautiful time of the year to go. But I was there once. I was actually in Edinburgh, and there was a freak snowstorm, and I hadn't packed anything warm. And so I had to go out and buy a big sweater to wear. And that is one of my favorite sweaters 25 years later that I still wear. And it has a great memory attached to it. So you can always kind of, if the weather turns on you, you got to go shopping and buy something fun.
Carolyn, here's a listener who probably wants to hear from you. If you're going to Helsinki in June, what other countries would you visit, and how easy is it to go between countries? I know you've been, your husband is Finn, so you've spent quite a bit of time there, and I imagine you've gone to other countries from Finland.
This is a great question, and it is so easy to go to other countries. One of the uniquely Finnish things to do, uniquely Nordic, Scandinavian things to do, is to take a ferry between countries. So you can go from Helsinki or from Turku to either Estonia's Tallinn or to Stockholm on these overnight ferries. They're like big cruise ships. And, you get on the arc, they go through, if you go to Sweden, we went to Stockholm this summer, and it's like an overnight, and you have dinner at a nice restaurant, and you have a cocktail, and you watch, and it's light all like till 11 o'clock at night. And the archipelago is the most beautiful, beautiful place, both the Swedish and the Finnish. And that's a great way to go. The second, and Tallinn's delightful. Tallinn is it looks like something out of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So it's in Estonia across, a different direction from Sweden. And then the other thing is to remember that Finland is a Schengen country. So what that means is once you clear customs in Finland, you fly from home in the US to Finland, you go through border control. If you're going to another Schengen country, like Croatia or Portugal or France or Denmark, you do not, it's like flying domestically in the US. You just get on the plane. You don't have to pull out your passport again until you go home.
Yeah. Great
So
point.
you really have a lot of options.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question about our thoughts on Egypt and Jordan as far as popularity. So I was in Egypt in November over Thanksgiving, and I can tell you the crowds are back. I had never, even before COVID and all of my travels, I've never seen a place with so many tour groups, large tour groups. They are back in Egypt. And I was so grateful that I had someone kind of strategizing around that for my trip. I mean, there are places where you have to be in the same place as the tourists because you're not going to go to Egypt and not see the pyramids at Giza. But my guide took us the back way. So we started kind of on the back end of the pyramids. Most of the tour buses start in the front. We came in through the back. We had the Sphinx all to ourselves for like 10 minutes. Got this beautiful picture of my family standing in front of the Sphinx with no crowds. And so there are ways to kind of strategize around that. It was a wow lister who planned that trip. And we saw that Egypt was one of the top countries among our travelers last year in 2022. And it's again, one of the top countries this year. So it's definitely popular. I don't think that's going away, but I don't think you can wait out the interest in Egypt. But the right strategies can help you kind of navigate around the crowds. Another thing we did was taking a small dahabeah on the Nile to cruise for 4 nights rather than one of the larger cruise ships. And that gave us not just a more intimate experience if there only being 12 passengers on board, but also being allowed to get into smaller spots on shore where the large cruise ships couldn't dock. I think Jordan doesn't see quite as many tourists as Egypt, but there are certainly plenty of people who are doing both of them together. We also, Wendy, go ahead.
Well, I'm intrigued by this question. I want to see what Carolyn has to say. What is the situation in Iceland now? Is it a good time to go? And what time of year do you recommend? So I was in Iceland in July, and which is a lovely time to be there. June is probably maybe one of the amazing times because it's light out, like except for 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the night. But Carolyn, you've been there so many times. When do you think is a good time when is the best time and the worst time?
It depends. And that's a great question. So I've been to Iceland. The first 4 times I went to Iceland, I went in November and December. I had never seen the country in June or July. And it was dark most of the time. It was like the sun just rose up at like an inch from the horizon. It was like eternal sunset all day long. It was really strange, but it was fun. And Reykjavik was really bustling and the culture was great, just sort of similar to what we've been talking about. But we have some friends from home who went to Iceland with their 2 young kids, young meaning like 7 to 10. And they went a couple of weeks ago and rented a cottage in some bay in some fjord way outside of the city. And they were there when that big storm hit that canceled all these Icelandair flights and people were stuck in the airport. They had an amazing experience, and it was really sort of wild and beautiful. And so it's a great time to go. Summertime is I've had really good weather, and I've had really winter weather in the summertime. You never know what you're going to get, but it is a little bit more crowded. There are a lot of cruise ships that go in and out of there now. It's probably one of the hottest cruise destinations that exist, especially but not limited to smaller ships. But it is absolutely, if you want to do a driving tour, that's the better. You don't want to do that in December. But so depending on what you want to do is when you should go. If you want, and Wendy's point about the sun, I remember I was in July, and I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and and people were still carousing at the bar across the street from my hotel because it was sunny. It was daylight. It was the most bizarre thing. But I think it's a fascinating country, and I think the lifestyle and it's just fascinating, very expensive. But really, I think anytime you go, you just want to be sure about what you want to do, what experience you want to have.
Your point about how it's expensive. I also just want to point out to everybody, because we've all been hit by inflation here in the United States. Hopefully it's getting a little better now. But like a lot of people have felt like, oh, okay, you know, the dollar is really strong overseas, and there's such terrible inflation here. And just so that you know, I've been really surprised at how much inflation there is in other places. Like every place I've gone lately around the globe, the local people are like, oh my God, prices have gone insane. It's so expensive. The inflation is terrible. Like a lot of places around the world are having this inflation issue. It's not, you know, so things may seem more expensive than you would have thought. New Zealand was surprisingly expensive. On the other hand, I mean, it was less expensive than it might have been in the United States, but it was so much more expensive than it normally would be.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just something to sort of be aware of, that like inflation is in a lot of places.
I also forgot to mention that one of the prime draws in the wintertime in Iceland is the Northern Lights. And, you know, that's an incredible experience that you don't want to miss if you can help it.
Carolyn, we have a listener who's planning to go to Iceland this March. Should I go or no good? What say you?
I'd go. I'm curious where the listener is planning to, you know, if you're staying relatively around Reykjavik, I wouldn't hesitate. I think you'll have a great time. It won't be quite, you won't be sitting out in the Adirondack chairs out on the parks as much maybe as you might, but you can go to galleries and shops and have a lovely time there. And just being out and hiking, even in March, I would say probably March is sort of the end of winter, maybe beginning of mud season. But it's just, I think you just have to take a great attitude and adventurous spirit and wear layers.
Good advice. We have several different listeners who are asking about March, out of the box, interesting, off the beaten path ideas for March. Wendy, what are your favorites?
Okay, so I would totally consider Malta. Now, there's an example of a great time to go to a Mediterranean country, March. There are many options. That, to me, would be a great time to go to the Mediterranean. Instead of waiting till June, go in March. But Malta is such a cool island in the middle of the Mediterranean. A lot of people haven't heard of it, but it is just so, there's so much to do. Our travelers who come back from Malta just have glowing reviews, and March is an ideal time to be there. It's warm enough for the boating that you want to do, you know, getting out on the water, but it's also not too hot yet. But there are a lot of Mediterranean places that are great in March. Italy is one of them. Southern Spain is great in March. Carolyn, do you have other suggestions for Mediterranean places in March?
I mean, I've been to Sicily in March. I thought it was lovely. Palermo, it was just perfect weather. I mean, I would say go south rather than go north in March, if you can, in terms of the Mediterranean. But yeah, I definitely think the more southern destinations are probably the better ones at that point.
And beyond Europe, one of my favorite March trips was Patagonia. It's the fall there. And Patagonia is infamous for its wind, and it's actually the least windy of the season, the non-winter months in Patagonia. And there's fall foliage. It's just wonderful hiking weather. And everyone loves to hike in the fall when the air is kind of a little bit crisp, so you're not overheating. I just loved being in Chile and Argentina in March.
I think Argentina's Mendoza. We love wine. We love wine, and that's on our bucket list. And we would prefer to do that in March because we love autumn in the vineyards. It's just incredible.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. We've got a lot of questions still to go through. I see one that's what's the best time or month to visit Morocco? I've been to Morocco 9 times now, so I feel like I can weigh in on this. Generally speaking, like October, November, or March, April, those are great. Those sort of like spring, fall are great times for Morocco because you want it to be sort of cool enough in the cities, but also warm enough in the desert that you can spend the night in the Sahara and have that amazing overnight experience under the stars. So spring and fall are great times for Morocco. There's a question here, is October a good time to visit Australia and New Zealand? Brook, I think like, yes, sort of spring and fall, our spring is their fall is our spring, but those times that aren't either summer or winter, but are on, that spring or fall, or generally speaking, are very good times for Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Australia, I remember being there in June, July, August, their winter months, and everyone's bundled up. All the locals are bundled up in these heavy winter coats. And I was coming from the Northeast of the United States thinking like, this is balmy winter weather. It's really, it's quite a mild climate in much of Australia. New Zealand, has more snow and skiing options in the winter. But I think October in both places is quite lovely.
Any other questions that, there's one here, are the Christmas markets all about shopping? Is the experience good if not looking to acquire items? Absolutely, it's great. You don't need to shop for anything. It's not about shopping. It's more about the local culture. It's drinking Glühwein, which is mulled wine, and people are having outdoor. There's a lot of music and dancing and artisans, and you don't have to buy anything to enjoy it. Oh my God, the food's amazing.
So for all the times I've been to Christmas markets in Europe, I think I've bought something only one time, and it was in Strasbourg. But it's definitely, just to reiterate what Wendy's saying, it's music performances, it's concerts, it's the food is incredible. And every market has its own flavor. So if you go to different markets in different cities, you'll learn about different cities in a way you would never have known otherwise. It's not, it is about shopping, but it's not really about shopping.
There's a question about Dubai, which is a part of the world we haven't really touched on. Dubai in late July, my grandsons want to go. It's the only time they can go. I know it's very hot. It is possible to put a trip together then. And as this listener says, you are inside much of the time in Dubai. And from what I've heard, the hotel rates are much lower in July. Wendy, I believe you've been in the Middle East at that time of year.
Yeah, I took my sons. We went as a family. We were there in August in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And actually we had an awesome time. Yes, it was hot, but it was okay. We still were able to do everything we wanted to do. And yes, there are a lot of indoor experiences, but also it's so much fun. You almost don't even notice the heat after a while because it's just
dry
there's something
heat
else
as
to
well.
notice, Yeah, it's a dry heat.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question before we need to wrap it up? Brooke, which looks good to you?
Let's see. Well, how about suggestions for a good European destination for a multi-generational family trip with small children who might not want to walk a lot, and with grandparents who might not be able to walk a lot?
That's a tough one.
I think of villas as being great.
I think when you have, in my experience in Europe, when you have the people who can't walk a lot and the people who want to walk a lot, a villa is a great solution. If you can rent a villa and then you've got like transportation to the nearest city or whatever, basically the people who want to walk a lot, they can go hiking, they can go into the near town, they can do all their activities. And then the people who aren't very mobile, the grandparents can sit and watch the little kids who are playing in the pool. So like a villa kind of makes everybody happy. That's probably what I would opt for.
Yeah, that's my thought as well. And there are many places beyond Tuscany and Provence where you can get wonderful villas at much better, better bang for your buck throughout France and Italy and many other parts of Europe.
Well, you all asked some fabulous questions. There are a number, I want to keep answering these, but you know what? If you write to us at questions@WendyPerrin.com, we can answer them for you. Again, we'll try to turn these into articles. Hopefully you all subscribe to the newsletter. If you don't, just go to WendyPerrin.com and just go to the bottom of the site, subscribe to the newsletter, because that's where we will be sharing Zoom recordings, and we'll be sharing our articles and answer to these questions and the links of all the articles that we've been talking about. And we also hope that you will come back later this week. Again, tomorrow, Tuesday, we've got our travel talk on smarter flying, how to get the best seats and fares and flights and in 2023. On Wednesday, we've got experts on how to protect your trip, travel insurance, emergency assistance, evacuation assistance, because that has changed a lot during the pandemic. There's a lot to know. On Thursday, Carolyn is going to be talking about cool water itineraries, boats, cruises, and just new and unusual ways to see the world by water. We're very excited about that. And then on Friday, Gary Leff, the points and miles expert from View from the Wing, he is going to tell us how to get more for our miles and points in 2023. So we can't wait to see you for those Zooms as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to Brooke and to Carolyn for your fascinating answers. And again, if you have, anybody whose question we didn't get to, please feel free to write to questions@WendyPerrin.com and we will help you out. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.